All right, well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to talk about our farming operation. It's Brooklyn Grange is a rooftop farm in New York City, as I think we just mentioned. It's about we have about 6 acres of growing space across it, which comes out to about 25,000 square meters. And we grow about 55,000 kilograms of food per year. Listening to Matan talk, it actually, here's another photo of it. It resonated with me a little bit, looking at the roofs and just thinking about the process that I went through 13 years ago when I started it. I'm the co-founder of it, and very similarly, looking at the spaces from Google Maps and just thinking to myself, wow, it's kind of hard to differentiate a roof from ground space in some ways, because it's all space that gets hit by the sun and by the rain, and it can have soil and whatnot. But of course, there's tons of limitations of roofs, and that's kind of the journey that we went into, trying to figure out and say, wow, look at this area. We can see some of these spaces. This is North Brooklyn. This is right across the river from Manhattan, super dense part of the city, but there's still a lot of industrial zone out there. See if the laser doesn't work. But to look at this and say, wow, there's some roofs that are 1 acre or 1.5 acres or even 2 acres, which is the size of a small farm, that's driving 3-4 hours into the city, sometimes twice a week, to sell at Union Square Farmers Market, for example, or a place like that. So the thought was, well, let's try it. Let's see if we could put soil on the roof, and at the same time, I was just learning about the green roof industry, and it seemed like kind of a perfect sort of epicenter, a meeting of all these different issues. The U.S. has a very serious nutrition crisis. We've subsidized all of the wrong types of food that promote empty calories without nutrition. We would not get a breakfast like the one I had at the hotel this morning, typically. At our hotels, and so there's multi-layers of nutrition that's important. There's just the actual act of growing the good food, but there's also the massive act of creating the demand and shifting some cultural norms to create the demand for that food. There's of course the importance of ecology in our cities and promoting natural habitat and wildlife, local economies, green spaces, stormwater management, which were talked about earlier, cooling the cities, the urban heat island effect, insulating the building, and then also regional economies and local economies, which is something that I feel very strongly about. I think it promotes a lot of accountability in where we spend our money, to know that money gets spent more in a region rather than thousands of miles away. So all those things combined kind of created I think a smart opportunity. And New York also has a very specific issue. I'm just going to go back one to the combined sewage overflow. We get about 4 inches of rain per month, so that's I guess about 10 centimeters per month. So it's more than here. So not everything might be perfectly translatable. But the sewage system was not built with the capacity for the amount of rain that we'd get, because of course when the sewers were dug underneath the city hundreds of years ago, no one had the foresight to realize what New York would eventually become, and how much impermeable surface there would be, including roofs, roads, sidewalks, everything. So the concept of green infrastructure is a big thing in New York right now, and lots of other North American cities. And it's not just roofs, it's all the surfaces, but roofs, of course, are the largest chunk. It's a it's a low-hanging fruit to work on. But the concept is, when we get a very moderate amount of rain, maybe even just a centimeter, especially if it comes quickly, it mixes with our toilet water underneath, and overflows the systems, and then overflows the capacity that can run to the sewage treatment plant and then ends up in the river. So the more we can absorb and slow down that water, of course, that's the value to us. I'm just going to tell briefly the story of starting the roof. I think it pertains in several ways. Looking at that idea of, hey, what if we start a small farm right in the city on a roof? And this was the first project we started. This was 6,000 square feet, so 600 meters in Greenpoint in Brooklyn. And there's how it looked on Google Satellite. And it was a big success, but it was a bit small from a commercial endeavor in terms of how much it produces. And we said to ourselves, well, hey, what if we could put 6 of them out? Or what if we could approach an acre or something like that? And also, a very important point at that time, which has evolved a lot, was what's the value of the food and how can we get the yield that we want? So try to do some sort of analytics on it to look at the space that we use, the types of crops that we grow, the time it was in the ground, et cetera, to figure out what can we eventually produce per square foot with what we had. And we put together a business plan. I wanted to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts, although I'll also just mention now that tomorrow I'm also really looking forward to the workshop, and we'll have a lot more time to really go into details and ask questions about numbers and finances and whatnot. But I have some good high-level numbers in here. We needed $200,000 to start the first roof. And that was a pretty low dollar per square foot installation cost. And this is how we raised the funds. We got some loans from different people that were possibly interested in investing, or some friends and family. We did a crowdsourcing platform. These were the early days of Kickstarter. You can see that in the upper right. We through some events, although they didn't yield too much, and then equity. So we actually launched a business and then sold some shares of the business in order to raise the startup funds that we need. And in tandem, we found this location in Long Island City in Queens for the first Brooklyn Grange roof. It was 1 acre, we signed a lease quickly, and we installed this one with a crane. So each one of these super sacks is probably around a cubic meter of soil, and hauled them up and distributed it and converted the blank space into a fairly organized field of rows of vegetables, and started growing. For the technical folks in the room, I wanted to include a little bit too, just to look at the system we use. This was an original Optigrund system, which is German. I'm sure the green roof folks are familiar with it. It was a root barrier that would sit on the waterproof membrane of the roof, followed by a protection fabric, a drainage mat, which is about 1 centimeter or so of depth, a filter fabric to keep the soil and the organic matter out of the drainage mat, and then the soil above that. And the soil in our systems, they range, we've started several farms now since then, but they're going to range from about 8 inches to about 12 inches. So maximum about 30 centimeters, typically a little bit less. It's going to depend on both budget and the strength of the roof, of course. There's another picture of that location. So we started planting and filling up the space, and we quickly realized the value of the view as well. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. But you notice the beautiful view, and I learned a lot about how attracted people are to beautiful views on roofs. We got going. Here's a couple early pictures from the startup year of the farm. Getting everything going, distributing the vegetables, and there it is, filled up about half of the roof. And then 2 years later, we started a second space on 1.5 acres in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and you can see the before and after of that. This one was 1.5 acres. It used a deeper soil and a more expensive green roof system. a more professional green roof system as well, just with a couple extra additions to it, some aluminum siding and edging and so forth. And I wanted to include how we funded that as well. And this is important policy of New York that there are grants available. I think it was mentioned very briefly in one of the earlier presentations, but there's the DEP, that acronym in the lower right corner, that stands for the Department of Environmental Protection. And they have a green infrastructure grant that they have each year. It's an ongoing grant that's available, and folks can apply to it and fund green roofs and other green infrastructure projects. And that includes permeable pavement and water capture systems and other related things as well. Even some tree pit and design around streets too, which I think is also super important. And then the landlord helped a little bit, and then we had to raise another $120,000, which we figured out mostly through more equity and a couple more loans. This one was installed with a blower truck. This is probably the more common means of installing green roofs, especially larger green roofs right now in our area. It hooks up to a big truck at the ground level, and then it pumps the soil up, almost like a liquid. So there it is installed. Here's another picture of that space in action. You can see this is a lot of leafy greens. It's going to vary by the location and the season. We do a lot of crop rotation, so there's different things growing. There we are at some farmers markets. The produce, you see a couple good action shots of it. The salad mixes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, kale, chard. Pretty much everything that you'd expect to see growing. Cucumbers, peppers. We also make a hot sauce, which we started making from our extra peppers. We'd go to the market and sell what we could, and then take back what we had and started pureeing it, making some sauces. And we also have a bit of honey production from a handful of beehives. This is actually one of my favorite pictures because it really shows some of the volumes of food that we're growing. These bins are all full, and this is our walk-in cooler, and this would happen. Does happen a couple times a week, and then all this food goes out in a van to distribution. Where does our food go? You might be wondering. We actually don't, and I'm planning to talk about this a lot more in detail tomorrow, but we actually donate about half of it. And that's a new model for us, that half or 50% or so used to go to wholesale, to restaurants, chefs, and whatnot. A little bit before the pandemic started, we started finding some other sources of funding through private foundations and grants and other sort of nonprofit funding sources. And we realized that people were very interested in funding the ability to donate some of this food. And it really made sense for us on many levels, and one of them largely because we were starting to realize that it wasn't really fulfilling everything with our mission and our employees and the reason everybody works so hard to grow that food, knowing that a lot of that food was ending up in middle and upper class incomes people. And I talked a little bit about the nutrition crisis that's happening in the US right now. And that doesn't really help to solve it so much. But once we started realizing that there was money out there and there were foundations and people that were interested in helping to fund it, we could actually raise money and get paid for it because we needed that to cover all the labor that goes into it, but then actually donate that food then to food pantries. And then people in need poorer people or people that needed the food that could then go and get the food and take it home and cook it. And that was a really positive shift for us, and that's it's actually continued to grow as a percentage, and it's about half. And then the other amounts of our food go to farmers markets and to CSA, which is a weekly prescription or weekly bag or box that people prepay for and to come pick up. So, related, I mentioned the views earlier. We quickly realized that that the model was ripe for an expansion into events, and we started hosting more and more events, and quickly became a really critical aspect of our finances. So we host, along with the food, we host weddings and dinners and workshops and all different types of events such as that. Several hundred per year between a few of our locations. So I just had a couple other sort of action pictures. There's yoga once a week on the center space. There's lots of tours. This person has an exercise bike that's hooked up to a blender, and they make ice cream and sauces and things like that. It's pretty fun. We also have some chickens. So, all right, so transitioning then, as our events business was starting to build up, we realized that our next space, we really wanted to expand into events business, and that sort of formalized the diversification that I've been speaking about, where we actually raised substantially more money than we ever had, and built out another space, also with another grant from the Department of Environmental Protection, and built out a 3-acre rooftop space with an event space. So I'm going to just click through. We have a couple other photos of it. This is a building. And over on the left side, you can see sort of that white area. It's a construction photo, so it wasn't built yet, but that's where we built a building up there where we can actually host people. And then filled up all the rest of the area with a greenhouse and an office, and the remaining another 1.5 acres of vegetable production. This is a current picture from Google satellite. So you can see up on the top is that it's a green roof that actually isn't planted, it's sloped, but that's where the event space is. And there's a small green roof planted up there, and then about 1.5 acres of vegetables with an office and a greenhouse. And we signed a 20-year lease on this space also, so this will all be here for a long time. There's a picture of it. We've also, over time, started to modify our farming techniques a little bit. It used to be really packed in and super tidy, and everything was a vegetable, and everything was sellable and distributable. But we've realized that sometimes that's actually at odds slightly with developing a ecosystem. Because annual vegetables, they do die every year, and they're regrown, and they're spaced exactly how the farmer wants them spaced and whatnot. Watered exactly how we want it. So we've started putting in more perennials and more native species around the edges and borders and whatnot. And I think you can all probably guess why we do that. It's to create more habitat for insects and birds and wildlife, and to create a balance. And that can actually help with our pest issues as well, because having that balance, those insects can come in and, for example, eat the aphids or the spider mites or some of the things that agriculture's susceptible to. And we're very far from a monoculture, like where we'd have one species across the entire space. We have 40, 50, 60 different types of species, but we still have 500 tomatoes all in a row, all touching each other. So we still are even with all of our diversification, very susceptible to insects and viruses and other things that can plague agricultural plants. Here's a couple pictures of building out that space. It was during the pandemic, which you can see by the masks. And then this is the finished event space that's in Sunset Park. There it is, seated for an event before the people got there. Mixed uses, there's a band playing. We have open days every Sunday to invite the community up for free, and different things with music and food and farmers markets, and we invite other vendors up and things like that. Here's some examples of it. We used to call them roof stoops. And then simultaneously, we are a complicated business. We started also to build out our design, build, and maintenance services. And this was largely, I think, using our brand and the fact that we were getting a little bit of attention with our farm. And mostly people started coming to us and saying, hey, we want to build out a farm. Can you make a farm similar to what you've built? And this is where we have to be realistic, that as we had been doing this for a few years, we were also learning some of the, not just limitations, but also the peculiarities of rooftop farming, and realizing that it was not, at the end of the day, exactly like going out into a field and filling up 2 acres, or planting out 2 acres of soil. And mainly it was logistical things. One is the pure concept that that cities are very expensive, and labor is a lot more expensive in cities than it is in fields, or in rural regions. And we don't have the 3-hour drive, but of course everyone has to live in the city. We also realized that some challenges with logistics, with elevators, loading docks, trucks, things like that, where it's just a little bit more challenging. So when a lot of the clients would come to us and say we want a farm, at the beginning we were thinking, okay, well, all of our landscaping should be edible, because that's our brand and that's what we do. We grow food. But we quickly realized that that a lot of the climate in New York City is suitable to non-edibles. And in recent years, I've become a lot more excited about those types of plants, especially kind of repopulating with native species that have been largely ignored for a long time in the city, reintroducing those and accommodating the pollinators and some of the things that were being discussed earlier too in Tel Aviv. So refilling with perennial flowers and coreopsis and echinacеas and rudbeckias and not all native species also, but all different things that work. You can see these photos, and so these are some of the jobs that we've started to do offsite at different locations. And it strikes a balance. Sometimes there is small areas or even big areas for growing food. Sometimes not. It depends on the location, the access, the abilities or the desires of the client. But also we're really realizing the value of space and amenities and places for people to be, which also resonates with some of the other presentations. People to hang out at, have meetings at, or in residential buildings just to exist. Here's a sedum green roof. So I think that's probably the most translatable across the globe, is the sedum green roofs, because sedum is a plant variety that's just so resistant to drought and heat and cold, and it can handle a lot of different elements, and they can be quite beautiful as well. And they can be intermingled with other plants too. And then briefly, I wanted to talk about the Javits Center. You saw the large green roof, the sedum green roof that's here, which was, I believe, the largest in New York. And then we also manage the spot to the north that showed in that red box. Just checking the time. So we have about 1 acre of vegetables there. You can see the compost pile in the lower left there with the greenhouse. All different types of plants that go to the convention center, and also a food forest, which we've been very excited about. So we planted about 45 fruit trees, mostly apples and pears, and then filled it in with a couple additional North American native fruits. And then we planted an entire understory as well. So below it is horseradish and rhubarb and wild onions and anise hyssop and all sorts of currants and gooseberries and strawberries and asparagus and all sorts of cool lower growing perennials that are growing amidst this orchard. This is in 3.5 feet of soil in this section with the trees. in case folks are wondering how you can, or if you can grow that. So it's uniquely engineered and also a unique opportunity, but something that I think is hopefully going to give some inspiration for both roofs as well as ground level, to sort of have like these grazing and open areas, even in parks. This is what it looks like from above with a pavilion. So it's also part of a business model for events. This was the drawing and the proposal that we made for how we'd fill in the understory. You can see some of the plants that I mentioned there. There's grapes as well. So just in summary, there's a lot going on, and I figured it would help to just sort of bullet it out. We have our farms, the LIC, Brooklyn Navy Yard, and Sunset Park, and we have actually just recently transferred the LIC farm to an organization in Queens called the Boys and Girls Club, and we still manage it for them, but it's actually their farm. They have the lease now with the landlord. And then we have events at our farms, which is a substantial amount of our business. And we have green space installations, which is ongoing, which includes green roofs, gardens, tree pits, planters, and everything. And then we also have our maintenance. So we maintain over 70 accounts, and that includes all things plants, green roofs, backyards, green walls, indoor plants, et cetera, with an emphasis on roofs. And then we also maintain a couple larger gardens, which are notable at the bottom. The photo in the upper right is that. And the key there is the diversification, and especially through COVID, we are a business. And through some of the surprises with the virus and all the changes in our world right now, the diversification can be very beneficial in that we have a few different revenue streams which are related but actually very different. Events, weddings, things like that are very different business from growing food, as is the landscaping and taking care of clients and going to other sites. But they all feed into creating a single business, which needs to stay organized and smart, but also can help us so we can still achieve some of that original vision of growing a lot of healthy food with difficult economics. I wanted to just put up one financial snapshot also. It's tough to show this is 2022, so this is last year. And it's difficult to show summaries like this because every year is different and there's always some quirks to it. But I just wanted to put into perspective to show the three major revenue streams that our business has. And then you can see the size of them too. So you can see the farming is about $700,000 of vegetables, whereas the design, build, and maintenance all combined is quite a bit more than that. It's about $3 million of revenue. And then the events are a little bit around $1 million, totaling about $4.5 million of revenue per year. You can see the costs as they line up, and without listing each of them, we can kind of skip to the contribution. And you can see that the farming is about a break even, and that means that's the actual folks that are in the field growing the food, the water, the materials, the seeds, things like that all go into the very direct costs of the farming. It's basically a dollar in and a dollar out to produce that food. Yet it also plays a critical support role with some of the other areas of the business that have a much stronger margin and profitability. And the events that I just circled that 2,000 because that should be a higher number, but there was a couple challenges in that year. But then all that money then goes towards overhead, and overhead basically listed at the bottom. That's people, folks running the business, such as myself, the bookkeeper, operations people, the rent, insurance, marketing, etc., comes out conveniently to about the exact same number and leaves us with about zero. And that doesn't mean that it's failing, but it means that it's tight. And it means that decisions have to be constantly made very wisely. And another thing to really go into tomorrow, because I think we're running out of time in a few minutes, but tying that back to kind of how it works is we have to keep that business hat on at all times. And it's been a constant sort of a straddling between our idealism and wanting to do things that that you really can do in a open situation or in a vacuum or something like that, versus the realities of operating in New York City, a very difficult place to operate, with the challenges of the price of food, the subsidies of our food, and the desire to pay fair wages. And it's also something that's changed a lot as we've evolved, as everyone on the team has matured a little bit. When we first started as a startup, we were able to attract a lot of people that were willing to work for close to free or very low amounts, and just full of the passion. And we still have that energy, but now that some of us are in our 40s, you have to look at things a little bit differently. So it's been an interesting sort of evolution for a business over 13 years. Okay, then this is actually the last slide, but I just wanted to sort of formally summarize a few of the challenges that I'm happy to talk about a little bit more tomorrow. But the price of food, competing with mass production, which just gets more and more efficient by the second at our large farms, realizing our dependency on events revenues, the cost of people. Cities are expensive, as I've already mentioned. Our activities require a lot of people power. This is an interesting number for folks that are interested in the finances. Of that $4.5 million, that's our total revenue, $3.5 million goes to people, and we have over 70 people on our payroll right now. Also, the challenges of elevators, having many locations, and scale. And then finally, at the bottom is the idealistic challenges, how flexible is your DNA? What types of changes do you make over time? How quickly do you make them? And how does that play in with all those 70 people? So I think that about ties it up. I just wanted to thank you all for delaying a little bit, because I was scheduled to go on at what would have been 4 a.m. my time, but it got pushed back to 6, so I was ready to go. Just kidding. Yeah, but thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.